happened. Um, so recently, what has happened in 2017 is there was a ban on the practice of the sport, and which led to a lot of protests against the ban. So there were a lot of bring back Jallikattu kind of movements. What's unique about this is it started with the urban populations and then it spread to the rural, and it had a massive sort of impact, such that you will see large protesters gathering and talking about how they want to save Jallikattu. Um, Now, what has sort of in the ethical picture of it, it's actually a large overlap of many different complex issues. On the one side, so this is the manner in which it's portrayed to start with. Um, Cruelty prevention is the focus when it comes to animal ethics, because the human animal relationship is unique, especially when you're thinking about rural agricultural India, where there is still a lot of reliance on particularly bulls for most of the agricultural practices, which is why the law impacts primarily the working conditions of bulls, and the ban comes through precisely because any cruel practices are sort of any cruel practices that are observed are banned legally. That's how the ban impacted Jallikattu and was extended to the practice of Jallikattu. On the other side, what's happening is, to start with, sports and the role of sports in the Indian society is quite unique. Cricket being the most popular sport, how we think about sport itself, in a beyond the cricket sense, is a little difficult. Um, and then shifting on to ethical concerns about sports, most of the ethical concerns have so far been to do with um, with age frauds, or prevention of age frauds, prevention of doping and things like that. And because that has been the focus, is to start with a slight lack of sports ethics discourse in the Indian scenario. When now we think about Jallikattu both as impacted by animal ethics and sort of a traditional sport, there is a huge sort of intersection happening. But unfortunately, what happened throughout the protests was there was no ethical conversation at all. There was no discourse about where is the complexity in the issue, what are different aspects that are sort of impacted by Jallikattu. So what it sort of turned into is this two, just the two sides of the dilemma. It was put as if, so if you're pro Jallikattu, if you're looking to save Jallikattu, it was entirely sort of equated with promoting Tamil identity. The ancestry was traced, and like I said, the protest spread from the rural to the urban. On the other side, because it was an issue of preserving tradition, any form of animal activism was seen as a foreign imposition, which kind of also had the impact or implication that this is very much typical of the national imposition of the language and policies, which is limiting the Tamil identity. Because this was sort of, if you were sort of accepting animal rights, or if you're accepting what PETA is saying, you are going against the Tamil identity. Since that's how the conflict was sort of, it was a very clear cut. You were either here or there's sort of a dilemma. Some of the turns that the protest took was something of the sort of, it would be sort of protesting against anything that is viewed as non-traditional, so, or anything that has come from, so to speak, the outside. And there were many people who when interviewed, were talking about, yes, the non-Indian cows are no good for us. Coca-Cola has been uh, quite the disaster for us, and things like that, which to start with had nothing to do with the sport or the issues of the sport, but simply because it turned into us against them sort of a conflict. The them got equated with anything that wasn't typically traditional. Now, what this kind of missed was this: to start with, animal ethics is such a complex issue when we think about the Indian society. The cruelty prevention law is based on the principle of non-violence. Um, so it's rooted in the basic principle that no being should be harmed, extending from humans to the non-humans. Nobody should be should suffer. No suffering should be imposed upon anyone, which resulted in shaping the cruelty prevention laws as well. Um, Unfortunately, the matter is not just ethical, not just legal. It's heavily entangled with the religion and politics. Um, the way this non-violence principle gets applied, unfortunately, to non-human animals, has itself been quite inconsistent. Um, there has been a very special place uh, given to cows, precisely because of how significant they have been in typical Hindu sort of traditions. So one of the problems of simply promoting animal welfare or protecting animals in some ways at the cost of human beings has serious sort of marginalizing casteist concerns, precisely because this comes from a place of I'm just um,
Sorry, Avani. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just
not
made
at all,
sure
not at all.
everyone was muted so you were not disturbed.
I just thought maybe I'm running short of time or something like that.
Nope, nope, you're okay. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Not at all. All right. So when we think about this special place that cows have been given, be it ethical discourse, be it legal discourse, there has been, and even in practice, there has been serious marginalization in terms of Dalits and Muslims, which brings out the aspect that if you're fighting for animal rights, there are casteist implications of protecting or giving a special place, especially to cows, which itself becomes sort of troublesome ground just within animal ethics. So the animal ethical side isn't so clear either. The vegetarian sort of ethic has always been associated with high class, high caste Hindu societies, which means that by promoting that and sort of securing this special place for the cow has these typical sort of marginalizing overtones to it. Um, on the other hand, when we think about the economic aspect, bulls and cows have been an absolutely integral part of the work that is done in the fields, which is precisely why there are quite a few different sort of seasonal festivities around most of these animals. There will be typical ones for the cows, for the bulls, and so forth. Uh, what's happening in the current legal, ethical, political sort of complications is when we're thinking about farm animals and when we're thinking about working animals, again, there have been a lot of traditional practices which have taken place in the agricultural sector, which have now been modified severely precisely because it was noted that so especially the piercing through the nose and little things like that, which are very harmful to the animal, have been banned precisely because that's not essential to the work of the animal, and it is found quite cruel. So there have been some practices that are banned, some practices that have been permitted. Um, So the sphere of animal ethics in India itself is quite complex to start with, and then we. I'm sorry, my I. And then we enter this issue of Jallikattu, which has this sort of pride in tradition, in a traditional sport, yet the manner in which the animal is being used, there's just so much that's happening, ethically speaking, in the issue of Jallikattu. So, to start with, sports historically in India have been, especially the traditional sports, have been in the royal sort of settings where it's sort of for the sake of performance. It's at typical festivals. The entire shift towards sort of a pride about traditional sports and then turning it into a slightly commercialized event, or forming rules and regulations around it, has been a post-independence sort of movement, in which sports is very recently being thought of as a new opportunity of actually a livelihood, which it rarely used to be. Now, because of this kind of commercialization, what's also happening is that this spectatorship influences the nature of the sport as well, which has also happened quite a bit in Jallikattu. One of the most sort of cruel practices of Jallikattu is to make sure that the bull is as aggressive as he can be while um, the sport is being played. Is they're drugged in different ways. They're either sort of intensely given chili powder, or um, given alcohol just so that they will be at their most aggressive. Now, this is precisely where a lot of the animal activism has come into place. Now, the banning altogether has a very large impact economically, precisely because in the rural setting, these are huge annual events where people come from everywhere to this one place where it will be done. So it impacts all the spectators who are looking forward to this annual event, who would be traveling quite a bit, the players who have been sort of training this whole time. And again, these bulls have also been associated with, because they're the strongest of the sort of state and things like that. They've Raising them is quite an important part of their livelihood as well, because the winner bulls are also going, so the owners of the bulls are also going to receive a lot of economic benefit. uh, so in this, there's the legal implications of when we're thinking about prevention of cruelty. There are similar bull related sports that traditionally you will see almost all across the states, and there have been different negotiations. They have reduced some of the cruel practices and allowed the sport to go on. I think I'm too short of time to go into the details of that. Now, what's what's interesting is the question can in a way be reduced to how to weigh traditionally significant sports against contemporary values of cruelty prevention, but it has unfortunately not been done in this sort of ethical manner. Um, so there's some important questions that have been missed in the popular perception of Jallikattu, and how do we think about it? One of the first questions which is kind of missed is simply because it's a traditional sport, it's a cultural sport. Does that make it naturally acceptable? And does that make everything about the sport naturally acceptable? Shifting from that, if you're saying that the welfare of animals should be protected, um, should it be such that the sport altogether is banned? Is that the only manner in which it has to be done? Clearly, other states have been able to negotiate in a way that that doesn't have to be done. Um, So looking at who all the stakeholders are, I have touched upon most of these. Just one aspect that I haven't talked about is especially in the protest, there was a lot of voice about this is about preserving not just the tradition of playing Jallikattu. This is also about preventing the native breeds, um, which is absolutely understandable. And how do we go about doing that is precisely what was missing from the conversation. Um, I think, all right, 3-ish minutes. All right. So, in applying cruelty prevention, some of the aspects that have come up more recently, such as drugging the bulls or sort of doing things that make them more aggressive, can always be changed back. Safety of bulls can be checked regularly before and after the games. Now, what's unfortunately happened is none of these sort of analytical tools have been used. It's just us versus them, sort of a conversation that has gone on for too long. So I will quickly wrap up. So unfortunately, there has been a serious lack of ethical deliberation in the public discourse. In weighing the tradition versus contemporary values, what about the tradition should be preserved and what should be sort of taken from the contemporary values, is that kind of dialogue is unfortunately missing. This kind of weighing out relevant factors will allow for rethinking about Jallikattu ethics while just banning it altogether or preserving it as is. And um, although the discourse is missing, a lot of the negotiations that are happening in bringing the sport back and continuing the practices is around how do we try to retain both these values. A clearer ethical analysis would help it quite tremendously. With that, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avani. Very interesting. For many of us, this is the first introduction of Jallikattu. We haven't heard about it before, so it's very interesting, and thank you for bringing this to the conference and for sharing your work with us. So I appreciate that. I'd like to open the floor to questions. Jan, you're muted at the moment. Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you, Avani, for your talk. Why not ban it? I understand that there are caste issues here. So if I understand correctly, what you say is vegetarianism is primarily something of the higher castes, and the Hindi culture wants to impose itself on the Tamil culture, and therefore might also want to perhaps push towards banning it. I don't know. But whereas I understand that the Tamil culture should not be suppressed by the Hindi culture, that surely in itself is not a sufficient reason to say the practice should not be banned, because I find it difficult to understand what benefit this sport might have for the bulls. Or do you think that bulls do derive benefits from the sport? If they don't derive any benefits from it, what's the argument for keeping it?
The primary argument has been that the bulls actually are also very much the beneficiary on two levels. One is a lot of these native breeds will be lost had it not been for Jallikattu. There's very little reason to even raise these bulls and keep these bulls, which itself is problematic. And on the other hand, a lot of the bull raising by its nature, because it's sort of just a couple of days event, contrasted with the manner in which they are raised. They're raised with a lot of pride. They have been raised with a lot of care and love throughout the year, and that's where the benefit for the bull comes in. It's those two sort of days of the game for which they have been cared for all year around. So that's where the benefit for the bull comes in, for the individual bulls.
So the bulls are bred deliberately for the sport, and they are not used as working animals outside the days of the sport. Is that what you're saying?
As far as I understand, yes. I might be wrong on this. Again, this is a typically rural sport. I only have academic understanding of it, not enough real experience of it myself.
It seems like a major investment of resources to raise these bulls just for a few days of sport. Anyhow, yeah. But of course, I mean, the same argument is being used here by sheep farmers. That they should keep, if it wasn't for people eating sheep, we wouldn't have all these rare breeds. Yeah, so we should be grateful to the sheep farmers for keeping these breeds alive, because otherwise we wouldn't have them. And you could use that argument to support most of the flesh industry, if you like. We could even diversify further, seek ever new tastes of flesh so that we keep these rare breeds in existence. But I'm not quite persuaded if there's such great value in having all these different breeds, particularly if they impact on wild biodiversity, i.e. by keeping domesticated animals, we often actually take land away and resources away from wild animals who are being threatened with extinction in the process.
I know the argument you're referring to, Jan, is, oh, sorry, Ashish, in just a moment, often called the argument from existence. I know Rebecca Humphreys, who has joined this call, has written about that. Tom Regan has written about that as well in his primary work. His critique is effectively, you can't take credit for bringing something into existence if your intent is to treat it poorly. That's a sort of doubly wrong thing to do. So I didn't mean to jump the queue there. I think Ashish wants to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Hi, I just wanted to answer Jan's question here. I don't think they are just bred for the sport in particular. The main intention behind doing Jallikattu or practicing Jallikattu is to identify the better breed or the better variety of bull and then use them for mating, if I'm not wrong. So the bulls which can endure the sport, which are strong enough to last till the end of the sport, are mostly used for breeding, whereas the rest of them are mostly used for other purposes. So I think that is the main purpose of the sport. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. And I had a question to Avani. So here, when you're talking about the us versus them, so I think Tamil culture in itself is, let's say in popular culture, when it comes to mainstream Indian culture, Tamil culture is often disparaged or not given the same kind of attention that North Indian culture gets. So when you talk about us versus them, they are more than victims of this than the perpetrators. So the ethical issue, I don't think it's not it's completely disregarded, but I think the main issue that they are raising here is, why talk about Jallikattu when there are more unethical practices involving animals which are prevalent? For example, India is one of the biggest beef exporters in the world. So while our attention is on something like Jallikattu, why not focus on that more? Our dairy industry is absolutely unethical, unethical that way. So when it comes to that, why is the argument always led towards the culture of indigenous peoples and all that? So why do we focus on that rather than this is the main question that the protesters were bringing about? So what's your take on that?
What I'm sort of trying to say is, when we are thinking about Jallikattu, it turns into an oversimplification of us against them. I am in no way saying that it's unfair to turn it into us against them. It turns it into sort of a simplified issue of just us against them. The us against them misses a lot of the ethical complexity that there is in Jallikattu. That's all that I'm trying to argue.
Thank you for
Rebecca, we have time for a quick question.
Yeah, thank you. It's really interesting. I just wanted to ask about whether you had any views on the use of the treatment of cows in India for their skin and for leather for other parts of the world. And I'm just wondering if some of the ethical issues regarding cows as sacred creatures could be applied to the leather industry. I wonder if there's any work being done there. Do you know, Avani?
Unfortunately, ethically speaking, there isn't that's being done that I know of. I've been looking for how does the special status of the sacred cow sort of have this ethical conflict of by its nature, when we're calling the cow the mother, it's for the economic benefits in many ways, because the bull is not treated as such. In fact, male calves have a life only till their appropriate weight of being slaughtered, which also absolutely, which implies that the minute the cow's production is gone, it's either going to be abandoned, which is in itself also extremely problematic, because they end up wandering the streets and eating a lot of garbage and even far more painful things than the slaughterhouse. And if it's about the economic value, then how is there the consistency? This is definitely a huge ethical conflict, but unfortunately, to my knowledge, there isn't. Politically, this is such a sensitive topic that it immediately turns into us versus them, cow protectors versus murderers sort of a discourse. And unfortunately, there isn't enough ethical discourse that I have come across.
Thank you. Yeah, interesting.
Gabriella, would you like to wrap it up?
Yes. Thank you so much for your presentation, Avani. That was really interesting, and we certainly appreciate you staying up so very late to be able to participate with us here. And thank you for introducing us to this sport, quote unquote. I certainly would like to learn more about it. And we appreciate all your thoughts and your great slides. There was so much more there than we had time for today. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.